I'm going to be sewing Anastasia's Once Upon a December dress from the movie Anastasia. I remember loving this movie when I was little, especially how sparkly all of the dresses were and the music and everything. I love this movie, so I wanted to make the dress from it. And also, I got permission to film in an old church that's been converted into a ballroom, so stay to the end if you want to see me in the Anastasia dress in an old ballroom with stained glass windows. It's awesome. Let's get into it. So I researched a lot of different methods and fabrics and knew that the most important thing to me was that this dress be super sparkly. That's what I remember sticking out to me the most when I was little, so I wanted to do that justice. I also wanted the color to be the perfect pale yellow and light blue. I got 7 yards of pale yellow satin online and 1 yard of light blue satin. And this yellow turned out to be the perfect color. Then I deliberated a lot on whether to splurge on glittery fabric. I did, and I am so glad I did. I got 6 yards of this super glittery tulle mesh stuff from Etsy. It is so packed with glitter, and you can just see the sparkles all while it's moving. And it's the perfect color to go with the yellow, and they just kind of look like they blend into each other, and it's just so perfect. And then I also got the same but in white for the sleeves. But that's enough about the fabric. Let's get sewing. First, I cut a full circle skirt out of the satin. To do this with such a long ball gown skirt, you just cut out 2 half-circle skirts and make sure you half your waist measurement on each one so that put together they fit your waist. I decided to make the satin skirt ungathered because I didn't want there to be too much bulk at the waist. I did ease stitch it a tiny bit to fit the bodice though. Next, I cut a full gathered circle skirt out of the glitter fabric. To save time, I placed the satin skirt underneath and just cut around its shape. Again, I did this with 2 half-circle skirts, but I used my normal waist measurement on each one so that put together the waist would be double the size to be able to gather it down. When buying the fabric, I was really anxious about getting the color right, so I bought some white tulle for an extra skirt in case the satin was too dark, but I didn't end up needing it. The satin and the glitter blend perfectly together and make the exact color I wanted. Also, making circle skirts involves a lot of math, so I won't give you the full math details here. You can just look up a tutorial online. I decided to sew French seams on the skirt to make it really professional. To do a French seam, you sew the seam wrong sides together, trim the seam allowance, fold it over to be right sides together, and sew again. This creates a completely enclosed seam that looks professional, especially on see-through fabrics. I sewed French seams on all the skirt side and back seams. I also gathered the glitter skirt waist so that I could try it all on and spin around in it. So, sometimes I like to make up my own patterns, but recently I took some sewing classes in college and just kind of fell in love with how easy it is to use patterns and just know that it's going to fit you. So for this project, I really wanted it to fit me well. So I went ahead and used this pattern we had already, and I just used, I think these are pretty much the same, but I knew I wanted like a square neckline, and that's what these had. Because I kind of tried to make my own pattern that was kind of square necklined for my prom dress, and it just did not fit at all. So also because of that, I made a full mock-up of this. I think I took it apart, so I don't have it right now. So I traced the pattern pieces and then altered them to be how I wanted. And also the back of this pattern just has darts, but I wanted a full princess seam. So I just looked up how to do that. You basically just kind of make a big cut to make it, instead of a dart, so that it's like that. And I altered the neck to height I was comfortable with. And yeah, that's how I made the pattern for the bodice. Once I had my pattern made, I cut out the satin and the lining fabric. Because I hadn't completely finished the patterns, I added seam allowance on some parts. I sewed the lining together and ironed open the seam allowance. I decided to use the seam allowance as boning channels. You just sew down the edge of the seam allowance and put your boning, or in my case zip ties, in. Make sure to file the cut edges so they aren't pokey. I didn't get any footage, but I also cut out the glitter bodice pieces. I hand basted the glitter fabric to the satin so it would stay in place. I pinned and sewed the bodice pieces together. I also sewed the shoulder seams on the lining and outer layer. Next, I pinned and sewed the lining layer to the outer layer at the neckline. I wanted the neckline to be really good and square and not have the lining peeking out like in a past square neckline dress I made, so I made sure to trim the corner seam allowances super close to the point where I was worried they would unravel. This gave me the best results and a very nice square neckline. I hand basted the lining to the outer layer on the armholes, waist, and back. This isn't part of the outfit from the movie, but I wanted to add little white cap sleeves to go under the sheer flowy sleeves. I cut those out, hemmed them, and E-stitched the top. Then I needed to make the flowy white sleeves. In the movie, hers end more at her elbows, but I thought it would be more elegant to have them down to my wrists. I used a sleeve pattern, but just made the top bigger so it could be gathered, and widened the sleeve as much as I could with the fabric I had to make it more flowy. I only had a yard, but if I had more of the white fabric, I would have made them even more flowy. I sewed the sleeve seam with a French seam and gathered the top. I pinned the cap sleeve to the flowy sleeve and sewed it all to the bodice. I ended up accidentally sewing one of the cap sleeves with the hem wrong side up, but since it's under the flowy sleeve, nobody can tell, so I didn't worry about it. I trimmed the very bulky armhole seam allowances, since there's like 5 layers or something in there. I didn't film it, but I sewed bias tape over them to enclose them all and keep them from being itchy. I also shortened the sleeve since I had made it too long. Next, I sewed the glitter skirt to the satin skirt. I did 2 lines of stitching to make it really secure. Then I sewed the skirt to the bodice, again doing 2 lines of stitching. I wanted to do a zipper rather than a lace-up back because it's easier to sew, easier to put on, and personally more comfortable to me because I get kind of claustrophobic in lace-ups knowing that it would take a while if I wanted to take it off. But because I'm using a zipper, I need to sew the whole skirt to the top, which made me nervous that the dress would be heavy on my shoulders. Luckily, I made the waist and belt tight enough that the skirt held onto my waist nice and snug rather than hanging down. I think wearing a hoop skirt also helped lighten the weight of the skirt, as well as buying cheaper satin rather than heavier, more expensive satin. I sewed bias tape on to enclose the waist seam. At first I used thin double fold bias tape, but it kept slipping off the edge because it was so tiny. Then I found a perfect pale yellow larger single fold bias tape and used that instead, and it was perfect. Then I sewed on the zipper. A while ago, I bought a big pack of zippers so that I could just be creative without worrying about going to the store for a single zipper. So I wanted to use one from the pack. I didn't have pale yellow, but I had white and neon yellow. I decided the white complemented the dress better, and I'm glad I did. It looks more like a purposeful choice rather than just a completely wrong shade of yellow. I sewed the pale yellow bias tape onto the zipper seam allowances. I ended up having to take it all off though because the zipper broke and I had to put in a new one. I didn't put the bias tape back on in case I had to do it all again, but now the zipper works, so it's all good. I only have vertical footage of hemming. The hem is 20 feet long, so I just couldn't be bothered to pin and iron a nice hem. I just folded it over as I went and it turned out okay. You barely see it on a gown like this anyway, so it's fine. And the dress was done. Now I just had the blue bows. I cut out the big tails, the sash around the waist, and a big rectangle to fold up for the bow part, and a strip to go around the middle of the bow. I didn't know how big I wanted to make things, so I just guessed and fixed things as I went along. I made the waist belt too wide, so I folded it in half, and that worked fine. Okay, so here's the belt. I just have 3 hook and eyes sewn in for around the waist, and then hooks on either side so that the bow is centered, and then I have hooks on the bow, and then it just hooks on like that. And here's all the pieces of the bow. It's looped around, it's kind of a folded rectangle, and then you've got this centerpiece. And I just kind of hand sewed the big tails. And here we have the hair bow. It's just a folded over a rectangle with another rectangle around it and kind of hand sewed down with a barrettes shoved in. And for my accessories, I have this crown. I got it on Etsy a while ago for prom, but I didn't really end up wearing it, so I was happy to be able to wear it with this dress. It's very sparkly. I know Anastasia has her own crown, but I just wanted to use what I already had, and it's very pretty. I loved making this. This is a dream come true. This is the best fitting bodice I've made so far, and I'm very proud of how professionally I finished the inside. Also, of course, I love how sparkly it is and how it's the perfect color. I had gone through some hard times and hadn't been sewing very much, so this was kind of a healing project, and I'm very happy with it. Dancing around by myself in this old church converted into a ballroom was a dream come true, and I'm so grateful that I got to do it. I also really enjoyed making YouTube shorts of the daily process, so check those out if you're interested. Thanks for watching!